6:53 p.m. Today is June 18, 2023. Ako sa Part 1, Evening Research Marvin Rey Vlog. Kids Paint, last session.
Germany first was the instruction the Allies' global strategy had provided. It was not until Nazi Germany had been conquered that all resources could be directed toward the Pacific theater of war. The troops knew very little about the islands. Accurate maps of the region were yet to be drawn up. This was the first deployment for the majority of the 19,000 U.S. Marines, most of whom were very young. Further out to sea, Admiral Frank Fletcher shielded the landing with a fleet of 3 aircraft carriers and the battleship North Carolina.
Oops.
The operation launched in the early hours of August 7th, 1942.
Alright.
With shelling of the coast of
1020 total number of Kids Paint pictures, Part 1, Evening Series.
Did not know what awaited them on the beach, nor did they know whether or not the landing sectors were defended, and if so, how. They didn't know how many of the enemy would be awaiting for them at the edge of the jungle, or whether they would live or die in the next few hours. They had no reason to suspect that the battle for the island of Guadalcanal would go down in history as one of the bloodiest in the Pacific War. At 9 a.m., the first Marines set foot on Red Beach, the name given to the landing sector by U.S. strategists. They encountered only a little resistance on the beach. The Japanese defending soldiers had withdrawn into the jungle where they suffered heavy losses at the hands of advancing American troops. By the following day, the U.S. Marines had already taken control of the airfield. They christened it Henderson Field in honor of Major Lofton Henderson, who fell at Midway. Then they set out in pursuit of the Japanese troops.
Okay guys, Kids Paint.
That night and the following days saw repeated hard-fought sea battles. The Japanese sank several American cruisers. The Battle of Savo Island is considered the greatest defeat suffered by the U.S. Navy during the Second World War. Soldiers engaged in hand-to-hand combat in the hinterland and jungle of Guadalcanal. November 1942, the Marines finally gained the upper hand on Guadalcanal. On the other side of the globe, the destruction of Germany's 6th Army began in Stalingrad, Russia. The British expelled General Rommel from Egypt. And while the U.S. drove the remaining Japanese troops out of Guadalcanal, the Allies landed on the North African coast. The Americans, British, and French worked together to establish control over Morocco, Tunisia,
Continue.
and Algeria. Hitler was losing the initiative in Europe. In the Pacific, the Americans finally got the chance to go on an all-out offensive against the Japanese Empire. November 1942 marks the turning point in the Second World War. The U.S. had seized an important base with Guadalcanal. Their Air Force now controlled the Solomon Islands. But the price for such a victory was much bloodshed. The Americans lost almost 7,000 men in the battle for the island. The Japanese, on the other hand, suffered more than double the number of fatalities. Because of the island's airfield, and unbeknownst to the Japanese high command, it had lost its most important general in the fight for supremacy in the Pacific. American codebreakers had decoded a radio message which revealed that Admiral Yamamoto was due to do a tour of inspection. U.S. commanding officers decided to intercept his plane. Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, was to be made accountable for the attack. The mission was given to one of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning squadrons stationed on Guadalcanal. The planes, with their distinctive twin-tail booms, were deployed as reconnaissance planes and as high-altitude fighters. Vengeance was the code name given to the operation, which launched with a group of interceptors taking flight on April 18, 1943. The pilots knew of Yamamoto's destination, his flight route, and exact flight time. They even knew who was escorting him. The conditions for interception could not have been better. After flying 650 kilometers, the American fighters engaged the Admiral's aircraft. Isoroku Yamamoto died in a hail of bullets. His plane crashed into the jungle on Bougainville Island, one of the Solomon Islands. Killing Yamamoto meant that the U.S. had eliminated one of Japan's most important figures from the game. The Americans turned their attention to the Aleutian Islands following the death of the enemy's chief strategist. The uninhabited and strategically unimportant archipelago was occupied by the Japanese as a diversion before the attack on Midway. Since then, 2,500 Japanese soldiers had been holding out on the American territory. An unacceptable situation for the U.S. They sent 150,000 soldiers to the islands of Attu and
7 p.m. Thank you, Chapchakash Plana.
Kamchatka to liberate them from occupying forces. More Americans died in these battles due to adverse weather conditions than at the hands of the enemy. The soldiers deployed to the Aleutian Islands were poorly prepared and inadequately equipped. The Japanese defended the islands with fierce determination. In one last desperate attack against American supremacy, approximately 500 Japanese soldiers committed mass suicide following the Bushido Samurai Codex. This involved holding grenades against their stomachs and detonating them. They would rather die than surrender. The U.S. troops would continue to encounter this conduct repeatedly during the war with Japan, and this behavior contributed to a significantly high number of losses on both sides. The battles for the islands of Attu and Kiska carried on well into August 1943. American commanders had already turned their attention to new objectives. This is why the Battle of the Aleutian Islands is also known as the Forgotten Battle. After the Solomon Islands had been secured, the United States began its advance on the Japanese motherland. One aircraft carrier after another left the shipyards. In 1943 alone, the U.S. Navy put half a dozen carriers of the new Essex class into service. Approximately 270 meters long, with a displacement of 27,000 metric tons and a crew of over 2,600 men. A floating airport with space for 80 to 100 aircraft. The units entered the Pacific Ocean through the Panama Canal.
Last session.
Formed into aircraft carrier groups. In November 1943, Operation Galvanic was launched. The objective was to conquer the Gilbert Islands, a strategically important chain of atolls on the dividing line between the North and South Pacific. The U.S. had set a veritable armada in motion. 17 aircraft carriers and 10 battleships were pulled together in front of the Gilbert Islands, as well as numerous cruisers, destroyers, and troop transporters. Tankers and freighters supplied the huge battle unit. Galvanic marked the beginning of an island-jumping operation by the American Armed Forces, which had already been described in War Plan Orange, a strategy paper from 1919, drawn up in case of a war with Japan.
Dapat ay part 2 guys. Thank you for watching this video.
The operation